The galaxy had known about humans for 12 years. In that time, not a single species had bothered to learn their names. To the Galactic Council, Earth was a small blue rock spinning at the edge of nowhere. Its people were young, loud, and unremarkable. They had only discovered faster-than-light travel a generation ago. They had no empire, no ancient bloodlines, no fleets worth counting. They were useful only because their colonies sat between two rival territories, acting as a buffer that kept more important species from fighting each other. That was the only reason anyone tolerated them at all. High Speaker Varel Dane had served on the council for over 300 years. He had watched empires rise and crumble. He had brokered peace between species that had fought for millennia. In all that time, he had never once considered humanity worth a second thought. When the Pyron Dominion submitted their petition to relocate 3 human colony worlds to make room for Pyron expansion, Dane barely read the document before putting it to a vote. The vote passed in minutes. 41 species voted in favor. 1 abstained. The Solani Observer, a quiet diplomat named Oren Viss, had raised his hand to abstain, but said nothing more. He told himself later that he should have spoken up. He told himself that for a very long time. No one informed humanity. No one thought they needed to. 6 days later, the Pyron fleet arrived at New Masan. New Masan was not a large colony. It was home to 1.6 million people, mostly families who had left Earth looking for open skies and fresh soil. They were farmers, teachers, engineers, and shopkeepers. They had built their towns with their own hands. They had named their streets after places back on Earth they would never see again. They had planted trees that would take 50 years to grow tall, because they believed they had 50 years. They did not. The Pyran commander, acting under direct orders from Envoy Luma Ket, did not attempt relocation. Relocation was expensive and slow. Bombardment was neither. The Pyran fleet positioned itself in orbit and opened fire at dawn, local time. The first strikes hit the capital city. The ground turned to glass. Buildings that had stood for a decade vanished in seconds. People who had been eating breakfast, walking to work, holding their children, were gone before they understood what was happening. The bombardment lasted 9 hours. When it was over, New Masan was silent. Within the week, 2 more colonies fell. Hala Station, a mining outpost of 80,000 souls, was destroyed when the Pyran vented its atmosphere into space. Port Gyong, a coastal settlement of 300,000, was burned from orbit until the oceans boiled. The total dead, 2.1 million human beings. On Earth, the emergency transmission arrived at 3 in the morning, Seoul time. President Park Tae-won was woken by his chief of staff, who could not stop shaking. Tae-won watched the footage in silence. He watched it twice. Then he dressed, walked to his office, and sat behind his desk for 1 hour without speaking to anyone. The footage was broadcast worldwide by morning. Every screen on Earth showed the same images. The craters where towns had been, the blackened ground, the silence where 2 million voices used to be. Earth did not erupt into chaos. There were no riots, no panic, no screaming crowds. Something far more dangerous happened. The entire planet went quiet. It was the kind of quiet that comes before a man decides to do something he cannot take back. A cold, patient, focused silence that spread from city to city, country to country, until every human being on the planet understood, without being told, that something fundamental had changed. That afternoon, Tae-won addressed the United Earth Federation Parliament. The chamber was full. Every seat was taken. Every screen in the world was watching. Tae-won stood at the podium and looked out at the faces before him. He did not raise his voice. He did not clench his fists. He spoke the way a man speaks when he has already made his decision and is simply informing others. 12 years ago, we reached out to the stars and found that we were not alone, he said. We asked for nothing but a place among them. We offered friendship, we offered trade, we offered peace, and for 12 years, they looked at us and saw something small, something that could be stepped on. 3 days ago, the Pyron Dominion, with the full approval of the Galactic Council, murdered 2.1 million of our people. Our families, our children. He paused. We asked for peace. They answered with fire. So fire is what they will receive. Parliament did not vote. There was no need. Every representative stood. The approval was unanimous and wordless. That evening, Fleet Admiral Han Do-hyun received full wartime authority. He was a tall man with a face that looked like it had been carved from stone and never softened since. He had served in the Earth Navy for 30 years. He had trained for a war he hoped would never come. Now it had come, and he felt nothing but a terrible clarity. He contacted his chief strategist, Yoon Nari, within the hour. Nari was a woman who smiled often and meant it rarely. She had spent her entire career designing battle plans for enemies that did not yet exist. Now they did. Activate Iron Veil, Do-hyun told her. There was a pause on the line. Project Iron Veil was the most classified program in human history. It had been built in secret from the very first year of alien contact, because humanity had looked at the galaxy and understood one truth that no other species expected them to grasp. The universe was not safe, and promises of peace meant nothing without the power to enforce them. All 3 pillars? Nari asked. All 3. That night, Do-hyun stood alone in his command center, staring at the star map projected across the wall. Every Pyran world was marked in red. Their homeworld, their colonies, their shipyards, their supply lines, all of it laid bare. Nari's voice came through the comm. Admiral, what are the terms? Do-hyun did not blink. No negotiations. No terms. They learn what we are, or they stop existing. Somewhere out in the galaxy, the Pyran Dominion was celebrating its easy victory over a primitive species. They had no idea what was coming. None of them did. 3 months passed, and humanity vanished. Not from existence, but from the galaxy's sight. Every human trade ship pulled back from galactic lanes. Every communication channel went dark. Every embassy was emptied. Every diplomat recalled. Every relay station shut down. The borders of human space sealed like a wound closing, and behind that wall of silence, nothing came out. No signals, no messages, no pleas for justice, nothing. The Galactic Council did not know what to make of it. High Speaker Varel Dane sat in his chambers on Tessara, reading the intelligence reports with a mixture of annoyance and mild curiosity. His advisors told him the humans were likely in shock, grieving, broken. This was what lesser species did when they were struck hard enough. They retreated, they mourned, and eventually they sent diplomats to beg for whatever scraps of mercy the galaxy would offer. It had happened 100 times before with 100 other species. Dane expected it would happen again. Luma Ket, the Pyron envoy, was even less concerned. He walked the council halls with the confidence of a man who had just won a great victory. He gave speeches about the success of the relocation effort. He petitioned for more human territory. He laughed when asked about the silence from Earth. They are hiding, Ket told the council, as all weak things hide when they learn their place. Only Oren Viz was uneasy. The Solani observer had spent more time studying humanity than most council members thought necessary. He had read their history. He had learned about their wars, their famines, their revolutions, their capacity for both great kindness and unthinkable violence. He knew something that Dane and Ket did not. Humans did not go silent because they were afraid. They went silent because they were building something. Viz submitted a formal warning to the Council. He urged them to send a diplomatic mission to Earth. He urged them to offer reparations. He urged them to act before whatever was happening behind those sealed borders was finished. Dane read the warning. He filed it. He did nothing. Behind the sealed borders, Earth was transforming. Every shipyard on the planet and in orbit was running at full capacity, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Factories that had once built civilian transports were now producing warships. Mines that had once supplied construction materials were now feeding weapons foundries. The entire industrial power of a planet of 11 billion people turned toward a single purpose, with a focus that no alien species would have believed possible. At the center of it all was Shin Unji. Unji was the lead scientist of Project Iron Veil, and she was the most dangerous person in human space who had never held a weapon. She was small, quiet, and had the kind of face that made people think she was someone's kind older sister. She was the woman who had spent 15 years designing ways to kill on a scale that made orbital bombardment look like throwing rocks. Project Iron Veil had 3 pillars, and Unji unveiled them to Admiral Do-hyun and strategist Nari in a classified briefing deep beneath the surface of the moon. The first pillar was the Void Lance Array. It was a network of devices that could destabilize the fabric of subspace across an entire star system. Any ship that tried to jump to faster-than-light speed within the affected zone would be torn apart at the molecular level. In simple terms, it was a cage. Once activated, no one could run. The second pillar was the Heite drone program, named after the mythological beast that guarded against disaster. The Heite were autonomous weapons platforms, small and fast, with one terrifying feature. They could replicate themselves. Given enough raw material, a single Heite drone could become 100 in an hour, 1,000 in 3 hours, and 10,000 by nightfall. They were a swarm that grew the longer a battle lasted, and they did not tire, did not hesitate, and did not stop. The third pillar was the Echo Bomb. Unji explained it calmly. The Echo Bomb was a warhead designed to be fired into the core of a star. Once detonated, it would destabilize the fusion process at the stellar center and trigger a premature nova event. The star would die. Everything orbiting it would die with it. The room was silent for a long time after she finished. Nari spoke first. "You built a weapon that kills stars." "Yes," Unji said. "I built it because I hoped we would never need it. I was wrong." Admiral Do-hyun asked no questions. He simply nodded and told Unji to prepare all 3 systems for deployment. While the weapons were being built, the fleet was being assembled. 4,000 warships, crewed by men and women who had volunteered in numbers so large that the Navy had to turn people away. There was no shortage of soldiers. Not after New Masan. Not after Hala Station, not after Port Gyeong. Among them was Captain Baek Jisuk. Jisuk had been on Earth when New Masan was destroyed. His wife and his 6-year-old daughter had not. They had been in the capital city, in their small house with the blue door that Jisuk had painted himself the last time he visited. They were gone now. The house, the door, the street, the entire city. All of it turned to glass and ash. Jisuk did not cry when he received the news. He did not scream. He simply walked to the Naval Command Office and requested a combat assignment. He was given command of the flagship Gwanggaeto, named after the ancient Korean emperor who had expanded his kingdom through sheer force of will. It was the most powerful warship humanity had ever built, and Jisuk drove his crew harder than any captain in the fleet. He trained them until they could fight in their sleep. He trained them until they hated him. Then he trained them more. Yoon Nari finalized the battle plan and gave it a name, Operation Dokkaebi, after the trickster spirits of old Korean stories. The plan was not designed to win a war. Wars implied negotiation, compromise, and eventual peace treaty. Operation Dokkaebi was designed to deliver a message that would echo across the galaxy for 1,000 years. On the day the fleet launched, 4,000 warships rose from Earth's orbital shipyards in perfect formation. The sight of it made people on the ground stop and look up. Some cried, some saluted. Some simply watched in silence, knowing that the galaxy was about to learn something about humanity that it should have learned a long time ago. Admiral Dohyun stood on the bridge of the Gwanggaeto beside Captain Jisok and opened a channel to every ship in the fleet. "We are not going to war," he said. "War implies the enemy has a chance." The fleet jumped to faster-than-light speed and disappeared into the dark between the stars. Behind them, Earth waited, and the galaxy, still ignorant, still laughing, still certain that humans were nothing to fear, continued on as it always had. It would not continue for much longer. The Pyran Dominion detected the human fleet 6 hours before it arrived. Their long-range sensors picked up the energy signatures at the edge of their territory, a wall of light moving through subspace like a storm rolling across an open plain. The sensor officer on duty stared at the readings, ran them twice, and then called his commander with a voice that did not sound entirely steady. 9,000 Pyran warships were scrambled within the hour. It was the largest fleet the Dominion had ever assembled in one place. Their ships were bigger than human ships, heavier, better armored, and built by a civilization that had been fighting wars in space for over 1,000 years. They outnumbered the human fleet more than 2 to 1. By every calculation, by every model, by every piece of military doctrine the galaxy had ever written, the Pyran should have won. They did not. The human fleet dropped out of faster-than-light speed at the edge of Pyran territory in perfect formation. For exactly 11 seconds, nothing happened. The two fleets faced each other across the black, separated by a distance that light itself would need minutes to cross. Then the Void Lance arrays activated. It was invisible to the eye. There was no flash, no beam, no explosion. But across the entire star system, subspace collapsed like a floor giving way beneath your feet. Every Pyran ship that tried to calculate a jump to FTL received the same error. Destination unreachable. The escape routes were gone. The back doors were sealed. 9,000 Pyran warships were locked inside their own territory, with an enemy that had come specifically to destroy them. Luma Ket, commanding from the Pyran capital world of Verith Prime, received the report, and felt the first cold touch of something he had never experienced before. He pushed it down. He still had 9,000 ships. The humans had fewer than half that number. The math was simple. He ordered the home fleet to attack. The Pyran advanced in the standard galactic formation that had won wars for centuries. A broad wall of heavy warships at the front, fast attack ships on the flanks, support vessels in the rear. It was disciplined, proven, and effective against every enemy the galaxy had ever produced. Yoon Nari had studied this formation for years. She had run 10,000 simulations against it. She had found its weaknesses, the way a surgeon finds the space between ribs. The human fleet did not form a wall. Ships scattered in what looked like chaos, but was something far worse. Controlled unpredictability. They moved in small groups of 5 or 6, striking from different angles, changing direction constantly, never holding still long enough to be targeted. Pyran gunners, trained to fire at formations, found themselves shooting at empty space where human ships had been half a second earlier. The electronic warfare hit next. Human ships broadcast a storm of false signals, ghost targets, and sensor noise that turned Pyran tactical screens into meaningless static. Commanders who had relied on perfect information their entire careers were suddenly blind, shouting orders into confusion. And then the Haite drones launched. Captain Baek Ji-seok gave the order from the bridge of the Gwanggaeto. He spoke one word: release. Across the human fleet, thousands of launch bays opened simultaneously, and the drones poured out like seeds scattering in wind. They were small, each one no larger than a ground vehicle, fast enough to dodge point defense fire and smart enough to find the weak spots in Pyron armor. But their true horror was not their speed or their intelligence. It was their numbers. The drones replicated. They consumed debris from destroyed Pyron ships, broke it down into raw material, and built copies of themselves in minutes. For every drone the Pyron shot down, 3 more appeared. For every wave they destroyed, a larger wave followed. The math that had favored the Pyron at the start of the battle began to reverse. Slowly at first, then with a speed that was almost sickening. 1 hour into the battle, the drones outnumbered the Pyron fleet. 2 hours in, they outnumbered them 10-1. Jisuk drove the Guangato straight into the heart of the Pyron formation. The flagship was a monster of engineering, bristling with weapons that fired faster and hit harder than anything the Pyron had ever faced. Jisuk fought with a precision that was almost mechanical, calling targets and firing solutions with a calm voice that never wavered. His crew, who had cursed his brutal training for months, now understood why he had pushed them so hard. They moved like extensions of his will, and the Guangato cut through the Pyron line like a blade through paper. The Pyron fleet broke. It did not retreat in good order. It shattered. Ships that had held formation for the first hour now scattered in every direction, desperately trying to escape a swarm that grew faster than they could kill it, and a human fleet that seemed to know their every move before they made it. Some ships surrendered. The drones did not acknowledge surrenders unless directly ordered to by human commanders. Jisuk ordered his drones to spare the surrendering ships. Not every human captain did the same. Nari had to issue a fleet-wide order to accept surrenders, and even then, there was a delay that cost Pyron lives. 6 hours after the first shot was fired, it was over. 7,200 Pyron warships were destroyed. The rest had surrendered or were drifting without power, their crews waiting to be collected. Human losses stood at 340 ships. The survivors retreated to Verath Prime. Ket, his hands shaking, broadcast a surrender offer on every frequency. He offered full capitulation. He offered territory. He offered anything. Admiral Do-hyun received the message on the bridge of the Guangato. He listened to it completely. Then he turned it off. "Admiral," Nari said carefully, "he is offering surrender." "I heard him," Do-hyun said. He gave a single order. 1 echo bomb was loaded into a long-range delivery vehicle and fired into the heart of the Pyron star. At the same time, Do-hyun opened a broadcast to Verath Prime. His voice was calm and even, the voice of a man delivering a weather report. "This is Fleet Admiral Han Do-hyun of the United Earth Navy. I have deployed a stellar destabilization device into your sun. You have 72 hours before the Nova event begins. I suggest you use that time to evacuate your civilian population. This channel will remain open for coordination of evacuation efforts." He paused. "This is not a negotiation. This is a consequence." The channel closed. Across Verath Prime, 9 billion Pyran citizens began the most desperate evacuation in the history of their species. Ships launched in chaos, packed beyond capacity, fleeing a dying sun. On the bridge of the Guangato, Jisuk watched the evacuation on the tactical display. He thought of his wife, standing in the kitchen of their small house, his daughter sitting at the table, drawing pictures with colored pens. He thought about how no one had given them 72 hours. He said nothing. He turned back to his station and waited. 3 days later, the Pyran sun collapsed. Verath Prime and everything on it was consumed. The flash was visible from neighboring star systems. The Galactic Council received the intelligence report within the hour. In the Great Chamber on Tessera, 42 species sat in absolute silence. Vorel Dane read the numbers. He read them again. His hands trembled. A species they had dismissed as primitives had destroyed a star, and they had given a warning first. That was the part that terrified him most. It meant they were not out of control. It meant they had chosen this. It meant they could do it again. Whenever they wanted. To whoever they wanted. Ket, aboard a refugee ship packed with survivors, stared out the viewport at the expanding cloud of light where his homeworld had been. His voice was barely a whisper. What have we woken up? No one answered him. No one needed to. The message arrived at the Galactic Council chambers on Tessara at midday, transmitted on every frequency, in every known language, with no encryption and no apology. It was 4 sentences long. This is President Park Tae-won of the United Earth Federation. The Pyran Dominion no longer exists as a military power. Their star is dead. We request a seat on the Galactic Council. We will not ask twice. For a full minute after the message was read aloud in the chamber, no one spoke. 42 species, represented by the most powerful diplomats and leaders in the galaxy, sat in their seats and said nothing. Some of them were processing. Some of them were calculating. Most of them were afraid. The fear spread fast. Within hours of the message, the Tessari diplomatic network was flooded with emergency communications. 3 species recalled their entire fleets to defend their homeworlds. 2 minor empires sent ambassadors to Earth before the Council had even responded, offering alliances, trade agreements, and tributes that would have been unthinkable a week earlier. The Durrani Collective, which shared a border with what had once been Pyron space, formally requested human protection. They had spent a century mocking humanity as primitive. Now they were begging for shelter. The galactic economy, which had been built on stable trade routes and predictable power structures, began to shake. Trade lanes near human space were abandoned overnight. Shipping companies refused to send vessels anywhere near Earth's borders. Stock equivalents across a dozen species crashed as investors panicked, unsure of what the new galaxy would look like, or whether their homeworlds would still exist in a month. High Speaker Vorel Dane called an emergency session of the full council. He stood at the central podium, a position he had occupied with quiet authority for over 3 centuries. And for the first time in his life, the chamber did not feel like his. We must respond with strength, Dane said. His voice was steady, but his eyes moved too quickly across the room, searching for agreement. The humans have committed an act of unprecedented destruction. They have annihilated a star system. If we do not respond, if we do not form a coalition and contain this threat, then every species in this chamber is at risk. He paused, waiting for the chorus of support he had always received. It did not come. Instead, the representatives exchanged glances. Quiet conversations rippled through the chamber. Dane watched as one delegate after another looked away from him. The numbers from the Battle of Verath Prime had spread across the galaxy like a virus. 4,000 human ships had destroyed 9,000 Pyrean warships and lost only 340 of their own. And they had weapons that could kill stars. No one in the chamber wanted to be the first to volunteer their fleet for the coalition Dane was proposing. Who will lead the response? Asked the Marathi delegate, a being known for its bluntness. Silence. I will ask again, the Marathi said. Who will commit ships? Who will send their children to fight the species that turned Verath Prime into a graveyard? Raise your hand. Not a single hand moved. It was at that moment that Orin Viz stood. The Solani observer had been quiet for most of his career on the council. He was not a leader. He was not a warrior. He was a diplomat who had spent his life watching and listening, and for 12 years he had watched the council treat humanity with a contempt that he had always known would lead somewhere terrible. They had not listened. Now, standing in the silent chamber, he felt something he had rarely allowed himself to feel. anger. "High Speaker," Viz said, and his voice carried across the room like a bell. "Before we discuss how to respond to humanity, perhaps we should discuss why humanity responded to us." Dane's expression tightened. "This is not the time for—" "It is exactly the time," Viz said. "This council sanctioned the destruction of 3 human colonies. This council voted to approve the Pyron petition. 41 species in this room raised their hands and condemned 2 million human civilians to death, without bothering to inform the species being killed. I abstained from that vote, and I have regretted every day since that I did not do more." The chamber stirred. Delegates shifted in their seats. Some looked down. "The humans did not start this," Viz continued. "We started this. We told them they did not matter. We told them their lives were less important than Pyran expansion. And when they were murdered, we expected them to come here and beg. Because that is what every other species does. That is what we have taught the galaxy to do. Come to the council and beg for scraps of justice." He looked directly at Dane. "The humans did not beg. They burned down the house of the species that attacked them, and then sent us a message telling us to make room at the table. And now you want to form a coalition against a species that we wronged first, that we have no hope of defeating? High Speaker, with the deepest respect, that is not courage. That is suicide." The chamber erupted. Delegates shouted. Some agreed, some did not. Dane called for order 3 times before the room quieted. Before the debate could resume, the doors to the chamber opened. A human woman walked in, flanked by 4 soldiers in black armor. She was not tall. She was not physically imposing. She walked with the calm, measured steps of someone who had already won, and was simply here to collect. Her name was Nari, and she was Earth's official envoy to the Galactic Council. Nari stood at the center of the chamber floor and looked up at the rings of alien faces staring down at her. She did not bow. She did not greet the High Speaker. She simply began to speak. "I will keep this brief," she said. "Earth has 5 demands. First, a permanent seat on this council with full voting rights. Second, formal recognition of human sovereign territory, expanded to 3 times its current borders. Third, a public statement from this council admitting that it sanctioned the Pyron attacks on human colonies. Fourth, full financial reparations paid by every species that voted in favor of the Pyron petition. Fifth, the extradition of Luma Ket to human custody to stand trial for crimes against humanity." She paused, and her eyes swept the room. "These are not requests. These are not starting points for negotiation. These are the terms. You will accept all of them, or you will learn what happens when we are not feeling generous." Dane leaned forward. "Envoy, the council does not respond to threats. Surely there is room for discussion, for compromise." "No," Nari said. The word was quiet and final. "You are not bargaining with us. You are being told the cost of our restraint. The fleet that destroyed the Pyran Dominion is still assembled. The weapons that killed their star are still armed. Every world in this galaxy that voted for the deaths of our people is marked on our maps. You will accept these terms because the alternative is something none of you will survive." Nari stood perfectly still, her hands clasped behind her back, waiting with the patience of someone who already knew the answer. Deep in human space, Shin Onji sat in her laboratory beneath the lunar surface and watched the council session on a delayed feed. Beside her was a sealed file marked with a classification level that only 3 people in human history had clearance to access. It was the 4th pillar of Project Iron Veil. Something she had built, not as a weapon of war, but as a final option if everything else failed. She had told Admiral Dohyun about it the week before. Hopefully we never need it, Do-hyun had said. Eun-ji hoped the same, but she had learned long ago that hope was not a strategy. In the council chamber, the vote was called. Dane looked around the room one last time, searching for the authority he had once held without question. He found nothing but silence and fear. The vote was unanimous. All 5 demands were accepted. As Nari turned to leave, Oren Vis stepped down from his seat and approached her in the corridor outside. His expression was careful, respectful, and deeply curious. "Envoy Yoon," he said quietly, "may I ask you something off the record?" Nari looked at him. She knew who he was. She knew he had abstained from the vote that killed her people. It was not enough to earn her trust, but it was enough to earn a moment of her time. "Ask," she said. "Would you really have used the Star Killer again?" Nari considered the question for a long moment. Then she almost smiled. Admiral Do-hyun gave the Pyran 72 hours to evacuate. That was his mercy, not ours. She walked away. Vis stood in the corridor and watched her go, and for the first time in his long career, he understood that the galaxy would never be the same. 1 year passed. The galaxy did not forget. It could not. The scar where the Parian sun had been was still visible on long-range sensors, a slowly expanding cloud of dust and radiation where a star and its worlds had once existed. Ships passing through that region of space gave it a wide berth. Pilots called it the grave. No one went near it unless they had to, and no one spoke about what had happened there without lowering their voice, as if the dead might hear them. Humanity took its seat on the Galactic Council on a cool morning in the Tasari capital. The ceremony was attended by representatives of all 42 member species, plus dozens of observers, journalists, and diplomats who had traveled from across the galaxy to witness the moment. The chamber was full. It was also quieter than anyone could remember. President Park Tae-won walked to the podium reserved for new council members. He was dressed simply, in a dark suit with no medals or decorations. He looked older than he had a year ago. The weight of what he had ordered sat on his shoulders in a way that would never fully lift, and he did not pretend otherwise. He spoke for 11 minutes. He talked about peace. He talked about cooperation. He talked about the future that was possible if the species of the galaxy chose to build it together. His words were warm, thoughtful, and carefully chosen. He did not mention the war. He did not mention the dead star. He did not need to. Every being in the room carried those facts in the back of their mind like a stone they could not put down. When he finished, the chamber applauded. It was not the polite, measured applause that usually greeted new members. It was the applause of people who were relieved that the man with the star-killing weapons was talking about friendship instead of fire. Tae-won returned to his seat. The human delegation sat in the section that had been empty for 12 years. It would never be empty again. 3 weeks later, Luma Ket was brought to Earth. The Pyran envoy had been found on a refugee transport at the edge of former Dominion space, traveling under a false name with forged documents. The Galactic Council had handed him over without protest. No one wanted to be seen protecting the man who had started a war that ended with a dead son. The trial was held in Seoul, in a courtroom that had been built specifically for the occasion. It was broadcast on every channel, in every language, across the galaxy. Billions watched. Ket sat behind a barrier of transparent material, his face drawn and thin, his eyes moving constantly around the room, as if searching for an escape that did not exist. The prosecution presented evidence for 6 days. Communications showing Ket had ordered the bombardment of New Masan, instead of the relocation he had been authorized to carry out. Records showing he had celebrated the death toll. Testimony from Pyran officers who confirmed that Ket had specifically instructed them to maximize civilian casualties because, in his words, dead primitives do not file complaints. Ket's defense argued that he had acted within the authority granted by the Galactic Council. It was a technically correct argument that convinced no one. The verdict was guilty. The sentence was life imprisonment. Not on Earth, not in any comfortable facility with walls and windows, but on a small penal station built in orbit around the expanding remnant of the Pyrran sun. Ket would spend the rest of his natural life looking out at the cloud of dust and light that had once been his homeworld. The court called it justice. Others called it something else. No one argued with it. Across the galaxy, the message was received. If you harmed humanity, there would be consequences, and those consequences would be designed to last. Captain Bake Jisok resigned his commission 1 month after the trial. He had served with distinction throughout the war. His name was spoken with respect on every human ship in the fleet. Do-hyun offered him a promotion to Rear Admiral. Jisok declined. I did what I was needed to do, he told the Admiral. Now I need to do something else. He returned to New Masan. The colony was gone. The planet was a scarred, lifeless rock, its surface still bearing the burns of the Pyrran bombardment. Nothing lived there, nothing grew, the atmosphere was thin and poisoned, and the wind that moved across the blackened ground carried the faint smell of something that might have been ash. A memorial had been built at the site of the former capital. It was a simple wall of dark stone, engraved with the names of every person who had died. 1.6 million names. It took 30 minutes just to walk from one end to the other. A ceremony was held. Dignitaries spoke. Military officers in dress uniforms saluted. Families who had lost people stood in clusters, holding each other, staring at names they would never stop reading. Jisok did not speak. He stood at the far end of the memorial wall, where the names of his family were carved, and placed 2 small stones at the base. One for his wife, one for his daughter. It was an old tradition, older than space travel, older than nations, a way of saying, I was here, I remember you, I have not forgotten. He stood there for a long time. Then he walked away, and he did not look back. Voreldane retired from his position as High Speaker. He left Tisara quietly, without ceremony, and returned to his homeworld. In the months that followed, he wrote his memoirs. They were not intended for publication, but they were leaked within a year. In them, he wrote many things about his long career, but the passage that spread across the galaxy like fire was a single paragraph about humanity. We made a mistake, common to the old and powerful, he wrote. We assumed that because a species was young, it was weak. We assumed that because they were small, they would stay small. We assumed that because they smiled and offered trade, they had no teeth. We were wrong on every count. The humans did not become dangerous because we attacked them. They were always dangerous. The attack simply gave them a reason to show us. Oren Viss was elected the new High Speaker, the first Solani to hold the position in Council history. He took office with a mandate for reform, and he carried it out with a quiet determination that surprised those who had always seen him as a passive observer. Under his leadership, the Council created new protections for emerging species, established independent oversight of military petitions, and formally abolished the practice of authorizing territorial seizures without the consent of the affected population. Behind closed doors, Viz maintained a direct communication line with Admiral Do-hyun. It was unofficial, unrecorded, and known to fewer than 10 people in the galaxy. Viz used it to share intelligence. Do-hyun used it to share warnings. Between them, they built a quiet understanding that served as a safety net beneath the public structures of galactic diplomacy. Neither of them fully trusted the other. Both of them understood that trust was less important than communication. Yunari was appointed Earth's permanent ambassador to the Council. She attended every session, spoke rarely, and when she did speak, the chamber went silent. Behind closed doors, galactic diplomats had given her a name. They called her the Blade That Smiles. She knew about the nickname. She did not mind it. Shin Eunji continued her work beneath the surface of the moon. Project Iron Veil remained active, maintained, and ready. The fourth pillar, the one that even Nari did not know about, stayed sealed in its classified file. Eunji checked on it once a month, the way a person checks on a locked door they hope will never be opened. She told Dohun she hoped it would stay buried forever. "So do I," Dohun said. He meant it, but he also made sure the key was always within reach. On a night 1 year and 3 days after the destruction of Verath Prime, Admiral Han Dohun stood on the observation deck of Earth's orbital command station. Below him, the planet turned slowly in the dark, blue and green and white, glowing with the lights of 11 billion people who were alive because he had been willing to do what was necessary. She was young, fresh from the academy, and she looked at the Admiral the way most young officers did, with a mixture of admiration and something close to fear. "Admiral," she said, "do you think they will ever try again?" Do-hyun looked at her. He considered the question the way he considered everything, carefully, completely, and without sentiment. "They will," he said. "That is the nature of power. Someone always wants to test it. A generation will pass. The fear will fade. Some species somewhere will look at what we have and decide they want it. They will convince themselves that we have grown soft, or slow, or comfortable. They will tell themselves that the stories about Verath Prime are exaggerated, and they will come." The young officer swallowed. "And when they do?" Do-hyun turned back to the window. The earth filled his vision, vast and alive and impossibly beautiful against the endless black. "When they do, we will be ready. Not because we want war, but because we learned a long time ago that the universe does not protect the kind. It protects the strong." He paused, and something in his expression softened, just for a moment. "We chose to be both." The officer nodded and left him alone. Do-hyun stood at the window for a while longer, watching the planet turn, watching the stars, watching the dark spaces between them, where threats lived and waited and planned. He was tired. He had been tired for a year. But he did not leave his post, because someone had to stand watch, and he had decided a long time ago that it would be him. Far below, on the surface of the earth, the lights of cities burned against the night. People lived their lives. Children went to school. Families sat down to dinner. Somewhere, a woman planted a tree that would take 50 years to grow tall, because she believed she had 50 years. Because someone in orbit above her had made sure she would. The galaxy had made many mistakes in its long and bloody history. Empires had risen, conquered, and crumbled into dust. Wars had been fought over territory, resources, pride, and fear. Species had been wiped out. Stars had been born and died. But in 10,000 years of recorded galactic history, no species, not one, had ever made the mistake of attacking humanity twice. None of them ever would.